Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And before I introduce today's guest and tell you what we're going to be talking about, I do want to kind of welcome all the new viewers we have had subscribing over the last few weeks. Something has happened with the YouTube algorithm. So for those who are new to us, I'm Paul Woodadge. I put my name up because I've assumed people know who I am, so I haven't put my name up. I'm Paul Woodadge. I'm a Brit living in Normandy. I've been doing this for a year and a half. And I want to remind people, if you have just found us, don't forget to click subscribe and click the little bell so you get notifications of when I'm doing new live streams. I put them on YouTube in little batches. We've got the Rise of the Third Reich coming up in a few days' time. But this show is kind of an orphan show, really. It was meant to be part of the main series of Battle of the Bulge shows a couple of weeks ago, but it had to be postponed. But I'm delighted that Jonathan Ware, my guest, is back. And if you don't know who Jonathan Ware is, on Twitter, he is Reassess History, which is about the most apt Twitter handle anyone can have because he tends to reassess history. The clue is in the name there, particularly the British side of things with some of the old narratives of how the British fought World War II, the 80s idea of the British being slow and crap and drinking tea all the time. Jonathan is challenging that kind of narrative all the time. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Jonathan Ware in. So good evening, John. How are you doing? I mean, you've had a bit of flu, haven't you?
I have.
Oh, hang on. I muted you accidentally there. Sorry. You've had a bit of flu.
I had a bit of flu. I made a really good joke then, and just take it like it was a good joke. So yeah.
Do the joke again. It's my fault. I pressed the wrong button.
Okay,
I haven't done it for a few days.
I've got flu. Everyone else has COVID. So you know, I'm a minority now in that regard. Yeah. It's very dull. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm glad to have you with us. So we are going to be talking primarily about the 53rd Welsh Division in the Ardennes, but also touching on some of the things you've been studying as well. So before we kind of get into the fact you've been studying the 53rd Division for some time, as a Brit, we are two Brits talking about this Battle of the Bulge event, and of course it is the largest land battle the US Army ever fought in. It, of course it is regarded as an American event, but there was that British element of it. So essentially, why should we all be aware of the British involvement? Just as a kind of a basic opening introduction there.
The British involvement comes, it comes to sort of cover the sort of pinnacle of where the Germans get to in many ways. It's also a scramble to stop the Germans reaching, they think, Brussels. So the Brits are determined to stop this. You get quite a lot of dramatic language, like, to the last bullet, to the last man, all this stuff. And then they turn up there and there's no Germans. So it's all a bit like, reconnaissance troops reporting there's no enemy here. What's going on? It also falls in a bit of a weird part of the campaign. This is after Market Garden. This is into the November of the Holland and Belgium campaign. The Germans punch back. They capture loads of liberated villages. There are some atrocities and stuff, but it's before the Reichswald. Now, the whole experience of the British relationship between the British and German soldier and the British German civilian is about to be redefined, and it's about to be redefined in a very, very hard way. Upon entering the Reich, things get worse and worse, more child soldiers, and really astonishingly horrific scenes where Nazi propaganda has really managed to ramp up civilians to go to extreme levels. But it's before that. So we're between sort of the engagements with SS in Normandy, where they really hated them. They've gone to Holland and they've been fighting Germans who have actually sometimes been quite agreeable, especially some of the Welsh experiences where they've been allowing cross-river medical parties to evacuate wounded, liaising about minefields and stuff, like really pretty genteel stuff. And then we have the Ardennes. It's a fairly short period of the campaign as well. And for the Welsh Division, one thing I'm going to be focusing on is it's about a week. I mean, we're talking about a very slim period. And for many soldiers, they don't really talk about it. Quite a lot of accounts viewed the training and the Reichswald as being harder. So again, it falls into this messy sort of middle ground.
Well, that's a very good point there, because one of the recurring themes of the earlier shows I did with John Bernstein and the others there is the relative inexperience of some of the American units that were facing that first thrust back in the middle of December. But the 53rd Welsh, like so many other units in the British Army, have been at it, slogging their way since Normandy. And this idea that we talked about with Peter Caddick-Adams in the first show of everybody kind of, I don't know whether it's expecting or kind of hoping for a quiet winter, because everyone's just knackered. Everyone has just had enough of it all, and they're kind of hoping for a bit of a break. And the Reichswald Forest, like the Hurtgen Forest for the Americans, has been just a meat grinder and just sapping of everybody's strength and morale and will. And then suddenly out of nowhere starts this this advance, and then you're having to send these troops in who are frankly exhausted, and that plays into it, doesn't it?
Yeah, they've had a lot of a turnover. So I'm going to throw down some general stats and figures which are total nonsense. By the end of 45, Welsh battalions claim to have as few as 4 to 6 Welsh soldiers in them. It's not true. That is definitely not true. But by this point of the campaign, you're looking at units who already, in many cases, had a 200% casualty rate, something along those lines, at least. One point, which I would come to later, I'll throw it in now. If most of the British units I look at, we're usually lucky to have more than 4 to 8 accounts, maybe 12 tops for the entire campaign in Northwest Europe. Now, you could have realistically 2,000, maybe 2,500 men go for an infantry battalion, something along those lines. So we're looking at tiny, tiny slices of what life was. And those are the men who chose to talk about them. And many soldiers chose to move on with their lives, used it as an exceptional period, and definitely didn't want to discuss it post-war. So you're talking to people who even then may have changed the narrative anyway, or were actively engaged in veterans groups. The Welsh Division's amazing because their veterans groups imploded on not one, but 2 occasions. And there was a lot of political wrangling, which saw the South Wales veterans really take hold of narrative. Which saw a lot of what they did get sort of erased ultimately. And also Bobby Ross, the divisional commander, dies very soon after the war in 52. So we're looking at this, that their experience as a whole is a bit more, it's a bit harder to get into than some other formations, which are better post-war studies. And this is also before we start seeing lots and lots and lots of the coastal gunners and RAF people being transferred to army and stuff coming in. So there is a different type of soldier at this point. And some of the stuff I've been looking at the Reichswald, where you see errors cropping up, you can sort of trace them back to Normandy, not to Normandy, to this sort of period, and go, we can start seeing this change. I mean, they struggle to get lieutenants in subalterns and stuff for First East Lancs. So their CO ends up running around reinforcement centres on the 12th of January, going, hey, who here wants to be in my battalion? I think you're all good candidates, and desperately trying to get cream of the crop then. So again, that's before Reichswald. Things are already starting to get a bit messy. And one thing I'm not going to talk about is the strength of battalions before this attack, because I don't have data here. But when you look at how some of the battalions are unable to function after 180 casualties, they're running well under establishment to start with. We are not talking about the heady days of Normandy where you go in with full establishment battalions. Your rear services, by the way, they're fully stocked. They're all good. They can crack on. But your line infantry companies are getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And this is a real problem we've got to deal with moving forward. A real problem.
It's a transition period, and not in a good way. I mean, it's, as you see, we talked about with Peter Caddick-Adams, the moving into kind of, not that we're going to do that today, the March and April, by which some of the strength has kind of come up again. The weather's got better. This is, as you say, it's a mix of veteran troops who are exhausted, new people who haven't got the experience, but that they haven't quite fit in yet, under strength. Morale is low. So it's not an ideal time to be facing an enemy, although, to be fair, the Germans are facing some of the exact same problems with their units. But that's another subject we have already touched on. But let's begin with what we're going to be talking about. So for those who are watching from, and this is maybe a banal question to start with, but those who are watching from perhaps the USA or Australia or Canada, what have you, when we say a Welsh division, we're talking about a division that has its origins in terms of the regiments having their regimental headquarters in Wales, as we have with the Scottish division. But as you said there, by this point of the war, it's a hodgepodge of people from all over the British Isles, but with still this core Welsh identity at its heart.
Yeah, you also have 71 Brigade in there, which was the International Brigade. They've now I don't have their establishment to front of me because I always go to Normandy, so you can guess, because that's my main jam. They've reorganised the battalion after division after heavy casualties in Normandy. So 71 Brigade did come in with the 1st East Lancs, 1st Oxon Bucks, and 1st Hun Light Infantry. So my edgy take is normally that this is the most representative unit of the British Army because it's got everyone in it. You've also had Dutch officers in here. You've had Norwegian officers in here. You've had Canlon officers in here. I've not yet found a German under an alternate identity yet, but they may well have been, you know, because they are lurking around these formations. But yeah, there's a lot of different national colour. They've also taken on Belgian and Dutch runners and stuff. There's sort of a almost an underclass of a liaison officer and stuff who are unofficial. They're civilians often enough accompanying these units running about. So these formations get more and more diverse as time goes on. They also had pretty good relations with the Belgian locals and stuff like that. So it's, yeah, the character has changed massively though. They did attempt for a while to cannibalize 38th Welsh Division to sustain Welsh character in these units, but that became impossible in Normandy, and they've ended up with officers from all over the place. But for 59th Staffordshire aficionados, which I know there's quite a few of because it's a great topic, there's loads of 59th Staffordshire personnel in this unit. Brigadier Elrington's running 71 Brigade, for example, and they bring in really top quality personnel. And I think it's a travesty they get disbanded at the end of the Normandy campaign, because 59th Staffordshire for nominal fighting formation. But again, you've got that influx, and they often serve together in entire companies and stuff. But again, by now that's all got watered down a bit. It's all getting watered down.
And yeah, but this is always, I love these side conversations, the rabbit holes, is that, you know, that for the Americans and Australians and things watching this, you know, this idea of a Welsh unit being Welsh, that's part of the kind of esprit de corps. It's part of the togetherness of a unit. But as I said, we're talking late 44, 45, when, as we know, even the Guards units are getting drafts in from their RAF regiment and things like that, because there's just not enough quality personnel to go around. As you say, the real line troops kind of seem to be at full strength, but finding people for these infantry units is an upwards struggle by this point in the war. And yet, if you can retain some kind of core identity of connection with the home country, so to speak, it is a way of bringing people in, saying, well, you're joining a Welsh unit now, the Welsh regiment doing their leek eating type thing. It's a way of integrating people quickly. And even though this, you know, as you said, they're from all over the British Isles, and indeed not just the British Isles. But anyway, we'll hand over to you in your PowerPoint presentation. So we've got some nice images and some maps and lots of graphs. It's a bit of everything today. We've got images, maps, and graphs. People are going to be very happy. So what are you going to try and convey to us today?
I'm going to try and sort of like underplay my topic massively. I know this is like an edgy thing to do, but like, let's tone this down. Let's tone the Welsh Division's involvement down on this story. That's edgy. That's why I've got the graphs out, because I want to try and contextualize this a bit better. One problem I often find when we talk about events is I tend to hyper focus on this stuff, really get into it, but you need that sense of perspective, especially regarding the Ardennes, because I think pretty much everyone said it. It's an American battle, and I think actually on that point, I'm not just throwing this in just for the edgy take as I normally do. I went to the IWM's new World War II galleries, and regular listeners on my content will expect that name at least once. But they have a chunk on the Ardennes there. And so I stood there with a mate of mine and we watched the footage. And the first point was it was all German soldiers on the screen. And I was like, oh, this is, the standard German propaganda reels, which are dragged out every 5 minutes.
Yeah,
but the second
including
point
on my
was,
channel as the introduction today. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. It's the same stuff. But the second point, which I actually swore at, and I'm trying not to swear today because I'm being a good boy. But the second point was that it was all British footage, and by which I mean, so I'm watching this stint about the Ardennes, and it's showing me Germans, maps of the battlefield, and Brits, and I don't think there was much more than about a second or two of Americans. So I'm standing there watching the IWM, which is our major museum, reframe the Battle of the Ardennes as being a German-British battle. Now that's unacceptable, and that's really happened because of their image holdings and stuff. But there we go. I mean, people are going to visit this exhibition. They're going to look at it and go, oh, the Brits played a massive part. The part the Brits play is very small. So as it came up in Peter Caddigas-Adams one, the other day. So it's a very small part we're playing, but through selective use of media and big exhibitions, you can really blow it out to be massive. And that actually provided a lot of thought for when I presented this, because some of the stuff I'm going to say about American troops, I don't think is accurate, but I'm going to comment on it because it's what came up in comments with veterans and stuff like that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the sort of underlying challenges of the campaign. And the first part, actually, got into this a bit so far. So how serious is this for the British Army to deal with? We're talking they get word of a major attack coming in. The Germans are going to drive to Brussels, maybe to Antwerp, cut them off. What the hell's going on? All these hundreds of tanks, loads of aircraft all come about. Oh, it's all a panic. Well, it's not so big a problem. It's not so big a problem that we don't stop leave. So I was going back from my notes today, and I'm like, oh, totes, we would have stopped leave because this is a major problem. But no. Leave to the UK and leave to Brussels and Antwerp continues through this period. To the extent, well, Brussels continues through this period, to the extent that 6 officers and 109 other ranks, whilst the division is engaged in the Ardennes, are able to leave their posts and return to Britain. So, whoa, hold on. This is not such a big crisis that we're looking at, that everyone's being thrown to the front lines, manning the guns. That does happen in Normandy a few times. This is not a flap like that. Oh, okay. And the language that soldiers refer to it crops up a lot is von Rundstedt's flap is sort of another one. So there's this clear thing in memory that it's not as serious a deal. And I was stunned to see that they're still allowing soldiers to go on leave during this period. It sits awkwardly between various campaigns. It's not massively remembered by troops. Those who are there, I mean, like the East Lancashires, you know, that it crops up quite a lot in their account, which I may actually do a whole thing on this one day because I was going back through it. It's a really good story about how the East Lancs fight. Here's a diary, just to confuse Paul about throwing things on screen. It's by 6th Royal Welsh Fusiliers medical officer, Captain Ross, and I picked it. Won it at auction years ago. It's never been gone through by anyone. I'm going to put the whole content online in the next few weeks for people to look at because I thought it really should be seen. But when you spoke to veterans more generally, it didn't crop up as much. The weirdest thing is when you spoke to people, they would talk about the Reichswald. They'd discuss the Reichswald, the advance into Germany, which is, I always call it a descent. I've gone through preliminary studies on writing about that campaign and always stepped back from it because it's a lot of work and it's a very, very, very dark topic. But it also is not like the liberation of Hertogenbosch, where you got soldiers fighting in the streets with Dutch, rescuing Dutch civilians and stuff. I think it was Alan King's famously photographed in his tank as Luke Van Gent, I believe it was pulled away from behind and stuff like that. So it comes at this transitionary stage, and many soldiers would say, oh, the Ardennes was tough, but you know what prepared us for it? Exercise Spartan and Exercise Tiger. Those were so hard. These extreme endurance exercises. And some of these soldiers are talking about events 2, 3, 4 years previous of early 45. And that says a lot about the training the Second Army were doing. They were doing very tough training. They were often running with kit that broke down the whole time. And when you look into 45 and the Ardennes, you're like, oh, okay, I can see what they're getting at. They trained in tough conditions. And early on, they had no kit to do proper military training. So all they were doing was running around fields and stuff and climbing mountains the whole time because there was nothing else to do bar extreme endurance exercises. They couldn't use ammunition because there wasn't enough of it going about. So it's strange that in terms of veteran memory, this doesn't register so much. But also for the Welsh Division, it's really one brigade has a pretty shitty time. Damn it, I S-bombed then. I said I wouldn't.
Shitty's okay. That's okay.
No, this is self-imposed. I've been told I'm too naughty. So the other side of it as well is that some of the units here, it's a battle of two halves. So some of the units do enter the line for a couple of days and they march about a lot. There's a lot of marching, and you'll see that on 1 or 2 of the graphs. But they're not really involved. They don't really take any casualties, and they all have Christmas dinners. Some of the soldiers who are assigned to guard bridges really do get so drunk they can't stand afterwards because the Belgians are bringing them out alcohol to thank them so much. So there is a bit of a breakdown in discipline when they know that's not really so dangerous. And it really complicates talking about this campaign because some soldiers from the same battalion will tell you, oh, it was really tough. And the others will go, oh, no, it's great. I was having some bevies and chatting up local girls. Both these things can be true. And both these things are true. But again, it complicates how we look at it. Some units, they had, arranged nice Christmas dinners and then had to reschedule them and stuff. But it's this weird sort of transition.
Well, I just have to say, I like your approach that, it's important to bring in the British story to the Ardennes, but important to bring it in at the level it should be at, not more than that. That's often the way YouTube works and the documentaries. There's the forgotten history. They crowbar it back in the story so much. They overcook it. They overdo it. The secret thing that did the thing that won the thing. And that's just pointless narrative, isn't it? You know, it's important to look at these things with all the elements of them, but at the size they should be acknowledged at and not beyond.
Yeah, and I mean, the point is we can have someone do exceptional bravery and gallantry in otherwise pointless engagements. Stuff like that can happen and does happen. Isn't it? Slim refers to one of the I think 1st Battalion RWF in Burma as one of the most gallant actions he ever saw, but it's a pointless scrap. So we have to contextualize this. And again, it's an American battle. The Americans are really doing the bleeding. One thing we take for granted, by the way, when I'm saying this, is when we go through this account, that there's wrecked American kit and German kit abandoned all over the place because they're starting to scrap back over those areas which were contested. So we need to look at that and consider that a little bit as well. So yeah. Oh, and it's also, all this is a story of diligent staff work. Now, if there's one thing I'll go on about, it's staff work. Staff work is the key to British Army success. Anyone who says I'm wrong can get in the bin. Failures of staff work are where a lot of other militaries tend to fall down. Poor HQ selection, stuff like that, you notice in Normandy. It has to be bad staff work. The troops may be performing well, but if the staff officers were doing a better job, there wouldn't be these problems with them being hit by air power and stuff quite so much. So I wanted to, through this is a long preamble, I wanted to avoid distorting this story too much, because the British account can be footnoted hard. So if you want airborne stuff, you're not going to get much of that today. If you want tanky stuff, it's not really going to feature in this so much. But some of the tanky stuff will feature a little bit. Because you then can kick it about and either make it a big deal or a little deal according to what you want. The answer is the British involvement is an interesting anecdote, probably worthy of a chapter in the history of the Ardennes campaign.
Yeah.
If you drag it out more or less than that, it's sort of, you know, more or less. And it covers for me a set period. And then, like Peter said, when do you decide the end of the battle anyway?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it morphs into something else, isn't it? And later on, is that the British Canadians kind of pick up what they'd been doing before it happened. So at what point is it the old plan revisited, and at what point is it something new still because of the Ardennes? It is a bit complicated, but when you mentioned kit there, a couple people on the sidebar started saying, what is John talking about when he's talking about kit? Are you talking about stuff soldiers are carrying, or are you talking about stuff beyond that, so vehicles and equipment and behind it? I mean, both, I suppose, really. But while you've prepared this slide there with winter clothing, because that's one of those perceptions we all have of the Ardennes. Everybody's going in there without any winter clothing, whether they're British, American, or otherwise. So
actually, that takes me to the point I was about to make. Can you flick back a slide? Because this will make perfect sense in a second. So this is a photograph, the top one. I was assured by soldiers at various points. I think the fourth man along I've spoken to 3 or 4 men who were that man. The general consensus, this is probably 1st Ox and Bucks, or maybe 1st East Lancs in Holland. Now, if you look at these infantrymen, you'll see they're carrying entrenching tools. Well, there is a point to this. They're carrying their entrenching tools on their arses, which were called bum slappers in a lot of Welsh units, because they slap your bum when you run and they keep you awake at night. And they've got GS shovels and picks. Originally, these were just nicked from any vehicles. There was a huge shortage of this kit in Normandy because they just robbed any vehicle for a shovel or a pick. And you got Piat and stuff, and they're all wearing their battle dress. Now, BD is a layered clothing system. I rate it very highly. And the Welsh Division should have had specialist winter snow gear, but they never got it for the campaign. I think there's 1 or 2 shots of soldiers maybe with helmet coverings, and we'll come to a couple of really, really great pictures in a second. So when they go to the Ardennes, all they've got over their BD is a greatcoat. Underneath it, though, they're wearing they'll usually wear a shirt, then a string vest. Because actually, it's shirt then string vest, or string vest then shirt. You can adjust the order according to heat or cold. So you can operate pretty efficiently as a British Army soldier, and with a pullover on top of that as well, under your battle dress.
And this one, I love doing rabbit holes because you're a mate of mine, but the string vest, I have to say, is a desperately unsung piece of equipment, because it's a bit of a passion killer. It doesn't look very sexy when you're wearing one, but it's about, folks, trapping the air pockets beneath layers. That's the whole thing. It works like a big puffy sleeping bag, as you say there, either against your skin, against a shirt, or between the shirt and the BD. A nice string vest there, all those air pockets there, warms you up, keeps you nice and toasty. So yeah.
and there's a correct way to wear it as well. So if it's too hot, you're meant to wear it to let heat out a little bit, and if it's too cold, you're meant to wear it to keep heat in. It's one of the two ways I've said it. So the basic British soldier, when you whack your greatcoat on top of that, you're laughing again. There is tons of in-theatre knitted stocks of stuff. You also have gloves. I nearly brought my set down from upstairs of different types and winter mittens. And then you've got your scrim scarves to go around your necks. And the scrim starts being introduced in like August 44, and then really becomes more obvious in September onwards. Like a lot of things.
Sorry, I like interrupting you, John, but is this again is going to be the experience of a division? Okay, there's lots of new people in it that has been on the line since June, because it's not like it was hot and then suddenly went cold. I mean, living in Normandy, you can have some very cold, wet days when the rain comes in. So these guys have spent enough time to know that a good pair of gloves and a mitten and an extra scarf and another layer is something worth acquiring. And I said the ability to, or the knowledge of carrying a shovel and a pick with you, that's all the stuff that is born out of spending time in Europe in all climates, because there's this idea, as I said, that Normandy was all sunshine and then the Ardennes is all snow, which is a ridiculously binary way of looking at it. These people have experienced all sorts of weather extremes in the previous 5 months, haven't they?
Yeah, and Holland is very soggy because the Germans have burst all the dams, dikes and dams and stuff. So they're used to living in pretty inclement conditions. Someone said to me, I think it's one of the World War II talk guys. He said it's basically an army living rough for a whole year. Well, yeah, it is. The joke is, of course, that your battle dress gets laundered every 2 weeks, so you're always in fresh clothes. So the point is, initially, our view of soldiers is wearing all this winter gear, this fantastic winter gear you see on screen. That's an image of the tank museum shoved up online a while ago, and I think they're sixth airborne soldiers. It's suggested. But the Welsh soldiers don't look like that. They never get that winter gear. I think it arrives. One of the anecdotes I read was that the 30 or 40 tons of stuff that arrives at the ordnance depot comes about a week or two after the Ardennes campaign has ended. And the British Army is lucky that they've developed battle dress from service dress, and it's all based on popular sportswear of the period. So when we look at modern armies with all their Under Armour stuff, and all that taking off, and how they've incorporated fitness wear into combat clothing, these aren't new ideas. So when we're looking at when militaries are considering moving forward, there's some fantastic civilian kit you can just adapt. So the Welsh Division doesn't get any of this stuff. I'm convinced that 6th Airborne acquire it through nebulous means, because then there must be a story there, because they have a lot of it. So there must be something going there, because I think they're running both through 30th Corps supply lines at this point.
It may have just been to do with the photographs, because the majority of photos you see of British troops in the Ardennes are of the 6th Airborne, and they are always wearing snow suits. So maybe it was if we're going to take photos, make sure the guys have got the latest gear, because it looks good for the public back home if our guys are in the latest camouflage gear. So maybe because the photographers were going to be there, maybe as simple as that.
Entirely possibly. Annoyingly, I've not asked any of the airborne specialists, but there's a lot of them because it's a popular topic. So if you're watching this, please get back with an answer. If you don't have an answer, there's a story there to be found one way or the other.
Yeah, definitely.
The other side of it as well is that the British soldier has access to the amazing leather jerkin, basically unchanged in 2,000 years. It just keeps you warm, and provided your core's warm and dry, you're doing all right. But a lot of the other stats there. So the main clothing issues bottom right was more to go through replacement gear through the campaign. That's probably actually a bit low because you could have got your clothing from other places. But it gives you an idea what armies are burning through over the course of a war, and you can then sort of halve that number to roughly where we are by 45. But the sheer amount also of additional warm boots and kit for drivers and stuff. Also at this point, the tank crew oversuit, which is not the pixie suit. That's post-war as anything that name. But the tank crew oversuit is now being fully worn by carrier drivers and stuff. The issue has hit them. So they've got this great warm item, but it doesn't keep the water out. So they were often supplementing their kit. So when the Welsh Division and the other units arrive in the Ardennes, you may note in French accounts and Belgian accounts and stuff, there tends to be this thing about an army of locusts descending. And if you go to the next picture, you see why. Now, this was sent to me by 53rd Recce veteran, and I've had it online. the son of 53rd Reke Veteran, who may be watching this. I think it's Dan, or I've forgotten your name. I'm very sorry. Trooper May's son, I believe. And if you look at them, they all look a bit odd. And you'll notice the chap on the far right of the image. He is wearing quite a big fluffy jacket. The others seem to be wearing things around their heads. And they were an army of locusts. And every house they went to, they stole all the fur coats, anything white. There's tea cozy helmet covers and stuff appearing and stuff like that. Anything white was nicked by the Welsh troops to try and provide some form of useful cover. It was felt that certain kit is not useful, or there wasn't enough of it about. Each soldier, though, does have their personal greatcoat. So why they're resorting to they are going out to target women's fur coats and stuff. Why this is happening, or it's a bit of paranoia. And if you look at the next shot, it's slightly clearer. So you get something. You've got these units, and 5-3 Reke, they view themselves as special forces, and they're running around in purloined fur coats and bed sheets around their heads. And this isn't uncommon for Welsh soldiers, because they are desperate for anything. There's not, they can't repaint the vehicles, so some of them throw sheets on it with like white sheets to hopefully freeze over in the same color and stuff. Weirdly enough, there is a Kar 98 in that picture, and I think a captured Russian submachine gun rechambered for German rounds. If you're really keen,
when you sent me the PowerPoint earlier, I looked at that photo and I thought you could literally use that for any campaign in about any war for about 1925 up to about 1970. That there's so much weirdness, and it's not a good enough quality that you can really see the detail. But you could use that to describe, I don't know, people in 1910. It could be Russian Revolution, that couldn't it? Almost.
Yeah, and the reason the images are such poor quality is because the camera film itself sustained damage from the cold temperatures of the period. So this isn't just a bad upload. This is how I got sent it from a high quality scan. So again, it makes you consider this is how cold it is. It's damaging film footage. And some British soldiers in the Ardennes, they were joking, "Oh, we've been sent out east. This is what Stalin's boys have been dealing with for a while." So the conditions seem to be so bad in the areas they're operating in. They become just a standard joke, really. And yeah, so these I love these shots. If you go to the next one, it shows the snow. Now this is from Team Spirit. Real keen beans may or may not know this. There were the Welsh Division had their own photography chap running about. There's between 300 and 500 images that he took of the campaign, and they were mostly issued in a souvenir postcard selection after the war. One of the original sets of them did go up for grabs at auction a few years ago. Annoyingly, I only heard about it a few weeks afterwards. But yeah, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images of Welsh troops out there which were taken by the division themselves for commemorative purposes, and this is one of those images from that set, and they used it in the Team Spirits, the division's administrative history. And it shows, I mean, some of the accounts are saying the snow's 6 inches deep they've got to advance through, but then other times they're saying there's no snow here, it's just absolutely sodden, it's miserable, the ground's disintegrating under our feet.
Well, that was Peter Caddick Adams' point about the microclimates of the Ardennes, is that you can go round a corner to a different valley and there's no snow, go back round to the next valley and there is snow, or go up a different altitude. It's that idea again we have of the Ardennes being a single environment, when of course it isn't. It's a large area, and we're talking over, well, in this case we're talking about a narrow window of a week, but over the course of the entire Battle of the Bulge campaign, several weather patterns had moved through that. So yeah, this is the Ardennes at its worst.
And also experiences of soldiers vary so greatly. So one thing in Normandy which struck me is soldiers literally, we're talking 200 meters apart, can have very different wars. And I mean, such different campaigns, you couldn't get over it. And you see that again here. So when we talk about memory, if we're talking about memory studies, there's a punch for someone I know. If we're talking about that sort of stuff, you can understand how these more complex processes work. One phrase which you do note a lot in accounts is terms like roads are glazed with ice. So what they do is they issue snow chains to most vehicles. So British trucks are now running on chains. They don't have specialist winter tires though. So the chains are helping with forward movement, but they're not stopping the lateral skidding and sliding. When they're digging into the ground, they're finding they can't get the guns in. Now, back in 43, early 44, the Welsh Division adopted the Tucker method, as it was called, where you'd take a Hawkins mine and blow a hole in the ground and quickly dig in. Now, I've not found accounts of it being used in the Ardennes. It got banned in Normandy because it would clearly signify where you were. You make a lot of noise, a lot of fuss. But the Canadians adopted it afterwards because it takes a while for these things to transfer through, even in the same army, even in the same corps, even units side by side. So the problem, the Welsh Division starts noticing that the more, and they're supporting Agras, the more they fire, the more damage the guns sustain. So the spades, they can't dig in properly. This is more going to affect, your 4.5s, 5.5s and stuff, more than 25 pounders. But so repeated firing does eventually bend trail legs and cause stress fractures in the guns themselves, which is not an attractive prospect to be caught with when your arty is slowly disintegrating. I wonder also if it corresponds to a lower than expected rate of munition expenditure by arty during the campaign for the Brits. So you've got loads of vehicles sliding off the roads the whole time. And again, if you go through material, you notice there's quite a lot of, when we look at accounts about British units or American units, they're written for people who served in them. They're not written for you and me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of assumed knowledge. Some are written by individual writers who just go through source material. Barclay seems to do that a lot. Or they're written by committee, and one person is gifted enough to be given the honour of writing. So you have to read between the lines a bit. And the phrase you do notice once or twice is how important the MTOs are. Now, MTO, I'm certain it's not something that's going to come up often because it's really not a sexy job. But motor transport officers were really bloody important. So they were responsible for overseeing all the vehicles a unit had. There are one or two good memoirs by them. And they tend to have quite boring wars because they're overseeing the maintenance, the running of the vehicles. When they were unloading vehicles from ships when they arrived in theatre, it was the MTOs overseeing that, not battalion commanders. And they had to liaise with the Royal Navy dockers to get it done. But in theatre here, a lot of weight of responsibility is falling on top of the MTOs to keep things moving at the sharp end. Now, I'll throw some of the bits that would come in later. I'm going to throw in here. So when they raced the 30th Corps up to take over from the Americans and throw them in, one of the problems they encounter is that when you're trying to get loads of troops into an area and a load of into an area and a load of troops out of an area, you have only a few roads. Now, the road surfaces disintegrate quite quickly. This was a problem encountered during the Great Swan. You're looking at a great road, you run literally thousands of tons of good vehicles over it, it's going to be gone. It will disintegrate. You're having to rebuild it the whole time. Roads also have been hit by shellfire and suffered damage from any flooding and stuff, and flash freezing, flash flooring, I think it's called, flooring. They're going to be even more susceptible. So the MTOs are responsible for keeping all this stuff moving. So when they take them from the Americans, they have massive traffic jams. Some Welsh soldiers, actually these Lanks, they spend 15 hours in vehicles getting into the line. Now, I haven't even got to the point of them getting in. This is all about all the problems of just operating in the Ardennes. This is a bit I really quite like, probably the most. So these soldiers are being slammed onto these vehicles. They're being parked bumper to bumper. Now, if you need to leave that vehicle for a wee or anything, you're actually endangering yourself, and in quite a serious way, because you are then one person by a road in the middle of the night in dark, trying to find somewhere to go, then find your vehicle, and if it gets clipped by anything, you're going to get crushed. One of the most distressing accidents in the campaign was when a tank was going over a bridge. It may have been East Riding Yeomanry, and it had duckbills on, but she still slid. And she slid and she pinned a Welsh soldier, I think it was from one of the Royal Welsh Fusilier battalions, pinned him to the side of the bridge. And that he was alive and screaming. The problem was the minute they moved that vehicle, he was going to die, and he did die because it was severe crush injuries, and it absolutely disturbed soldiers in an extent which, when I've spoken to people and stuff who had heard of the incident and then tracked it down, it was clearly a very disturbing moment to happen. That because the Shermans can't grip, and this means that ultimately you're having to decide: do you take your Shermans on the roads when? Before this, we use tank tracks. We try not to send tracks and wheels on the same road surface because of, again, damage. So they have to either move cross country where there could be mines and they need those paths cleared, or they just risk it, or you're going to try and take them down roads and then you're running into other problems. So the MTOs are constantly seeing vehicles get ditched, they're seeing crashes, and they're trying to get it back on. Where's it here? 30th Corps Remy had 17 recovery vehicles running the 30-mile stretch between Namur and Marsh. So they've got these constant, this day and night, constant vehicle on, vehicle off. That's in addition to all the units own bulldozers and all this sort of stuff, trying to open up routes and keep them moving. So when it comes to 51st Highland coming in to relieve the 53rd Welsh Division at the end of their stint, all the Welsh guns are left in situ, all the Welsh sort of heavy kit is left, and the Highlanders come up in their transport but leave all their kit behind and do a temporary swap because it's so much hassle moving this heavy gear. Don't bother, leave it. Just leave it. It's so much safer than clogging those roads. Almost every account refers to the roads being treacherous. And you can imagine just this absolute hellhole. And when all else fails, they are sometimes running out, finding civilians and getting horse teams in to drag out armoured cars and stuff. 5-3 Reke's campaign's really weird because a lot of it is just going around quasi-parties at times, but occasional Reke work and their vehicles are getting bogged down everywhere. So yeah, Captain Alan Llewellyn Williams of D Company 7 Royal Archer Fusiliers said conditions under which the troops fought were appalling: intense cold, deep snow, and the eerie darkness of the forest. So you've got all these sort of primordial feels. I know Philip Blood goes into how the forest manifests in culture, or most cultures, in very, very negative lights, really coming across. So it's all Hansel and Gretel country anyway, sort of vibes. When it comes to the sharp end as well, so I know I'm going to cover the account of how they're actually fighting and get there later, but the British soldier who's at the sharp end in the Ardennes, the first problem you've got is no vehicles can get forward, so nothing can get to you. You're relying on the same tracks and all this sort of stuff. Your universal carriers are great, but they're going to struggle. Your jeeps are great, but they're going to struggle. The Welsh Division has worked out these really good casualty systems, and I can go into this topic for quite a long time, involving rapid evacuation, where the stretch bearers run you back. They dump you off at a casualty collection point that isn't a CCP, but it's a little CCP. They pick you up in a universal carrier, race you back to the regimental aid post, and then either ambulances or carriers or ambulance jeeps will race you back from there. So this system works fantastically, but in the Ardennes, it don't work. So they request weasels. They need weasels because the stretcher bearers are having to walk huge distances with wounded. And every yard of those, as someone who's already injured, you're bleeding out and you've been padded, you're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So it's going to exacerbate fatality rates and the ability to treat wounded. So they request weasels. They eventually get an allocation of 30 or so, which comes later on. Because there's mines all over the shop. It is exceptionally dangerous to go anywhere because the Germans have just mined the whole place. Also shows they're not planning on advancing anytime soon. Hasn't really gone the right way. So all food and stuff has to be bought up by hand mostly, and this is why, like, if you look at quite a lot of the attacks, you're like, oh, this this isn't really the tempo you would expect. There was also beforehand, there's always been problems of overburdening infantry. That's a topic for another day. But if you do that here, you're really going to be in serious trouble. So we have more and more people having to go back and do these very risky runs. They've armed guards bringing up water, but even then, it's not good enough. So you've got companies and so on. They can't rely on just getting water sent up to them. So they're taking snow and they're melting it and they're drinking melted snow. It's all pretty bloody miserable, really.
Just to give you a break, because I know you might probably have a sip of water as well. It's also giving us this idea that we've been picking up during this series of shows, is that different units are facing entirely different problems in the Ardennes. We did a lot of focus in the first week about some of those American units that were in the line and they were there already and didn't have to move up because they were there and the problems they faced. And now we're addressing difficulty, especially a few weeks into the campaign, of bringing units up. Just the difficulty, which is why I'm loving, and so the viewers, the preamble about how to get your unit into the battle is as interesting, if not more interesting, than the battle itself, because it's just showing us the difficulty of moving in this environment, in these weather conditions.
Yeah, and the Welsh Division's meant to be totally fresh for this as well. So they were originally pulled out of the line in Holland, actually, which I'm coming to fairly soon, I think. They were meant to be pulled out in preparation for the Reichswald campaign. They're looking forward to that. They want specialist training. That also is a 30-day mega slog, which is a hell of a story. And what happens after that is another big story. It's just a unrelenting show of misery, frankly, for all involved. But then they get sent in here, so they're again relatively fresh, but they're holding pretty large fronts. There is patrolling by both sides going on. So it's more similar in some ways to the earlier days of Normandy, where you have patrols running into each other and nothing is safe, especially at the tail end of Operation Epsom to do with the Scottish corridor. So you can't even guarantee that your supply lines, your short ones, like back to battalion headquarters, are secure. It's messy on those grounds as well. Just operating is very tough. So once East Lancs, after they spend like 15 hours crammed inside vehicles, and the Burden, who's one of the battalion commanders, he writes the battalion history, and you can tell it's a sort of a quasi memoir. It's actually probably one of the best accounts, and actually it's for those who really want one of these, and I recommend it so much. The East Lancashire Regiment republished this because this is a relatively new edition. I really recommend it because it is such a good account of a battalion at war. Actually, probably one of my favorite ones. So yeah, and he refers to just the sheer difficulties that once they get up there as well, then they occupy these positions in the ground, and they have to sort of sit still for 3-4 days or so before doing ops, and they are absolutely miserable. They're stuck in just crap conditions, really. So yeah. They also actually, one weird thing again of why this is not as big a flap as it could be, is they're still maintaining the mobile bath and laundry rotations through this ish. So troops on the rear end are still able to get their baths. The frontline troops would, over the course of the Welsh commitment to battle, would still get their one bath every 2 weeks. So again, I'm trying to sort of tone some of these aspects down a bit. Although the problem is the burden always falls greatest on the infantrymen at the front line, and their casualties and everything exceed everyone else's, and they have the worst time. And it's why we will always have fewer accounts of infantry divisions in action than almost any other formation.
Yep.
And there's not the whole elite thing. So it's not like you'd go, oh, my granddad was a power. He was dynamic, leaping out of planes, or a glider pilot, or he was in the SAS, or he was involved in this cool ship. It was something that so many people did. It was seen as to be expected. It's also what's really interested. I love writing.
Going back to your point earlier about the regimental histories being written for those who were there, it's why they don't tend to talk about the sitting around miserable, waiting for some, spam and bully beef and biscuits to turn up and doing endless patrolling. They focus on the liberations and the funny times, and they cut out all of that repetitive existence that is so much of being infantryman's lot, is just sitting in between things that are going on, trying to keep warm, trying to keep full, and not worry about things.
Yeah, and if you look at the slide you've got up, I really like this slide. The first slide is more of Holland, of course, but it shows you, they've got fantastic dispatch rider systems. They've got really tightly integrated signals units and things, but they can't really use lots of those in the Ardennes because the ground conditions are so the antithesis of what you want to operate under. The stretcher bearers, I always make a point of talking about stretcher bearers, chaplains to a lesser extent in this case, but they are usually unarmed. The Germans cannot see any. If you're wearing a sigil on your shoulder or on your helmet, they won't see it more than 50 yards away. And if you're carrying a big flag, they may respect it. So yeah, and they're lugging the stretchers they're carrying weigh I think it's 10 kilos basic, 10 to 14 kilos before you put a casualty on it who may or may not still be wearing kit, and they have to drag this through inches and inches and inches of snow. So the demands on those individuals is skyrocket because they would have to walk and run miles a day more than anyone else, and especially in this environment where they're then having to trudge all the way back to your regimental aid post. And yeah, if you go to the last one, I just think this shot of a Jeep is just phenomenal because it shows how much snow has built up, and the conditions they're having to operate in. Again, we're not using certain footage of photos from certain someone today, someone who can be very stroppy institutionally, but it's again to try and give you this view of the campaign, how it functions. So actually, if you could flick to the casualties during Overlord.
Yeah.
So this is again where I sort of underplay all of this. Like, it's really bad for the infantry, but how does this slot into a bigger picture? If you look, I think you can see it quite clearly. The 14th to 27th of December and the 28th to the 10th of January. When you're looking at the numbers of casualties of men killed and missing and all this sort of stuff and wounded, and you compare them to the rest of the war as a whole, you're like, whoa, for this major period of operations, and I'm not I'm not, kicking down on what the division does in this period, putting it in context. But this major period, this major event, the casualties are pretty tiny. And when you look at that, you're like, wow, okay, so the Welsh Division, yes, is involved in the Battle of the Bulge, but we're looking at 154 other ranks wounded. We're looking at 35 killed, 16 officers wounded, and 3 officers killed. Those do mainly fall upon 158 Brigade. So 158 Brigade has a very, very, very different experience to everyone else. And that's probably why we have this pretty confused view of what the campaign was like. So yeah, I just think it's really important to look at that and consider that, and just let it slot in, because that data says so much about the campaign as a whole, especially when we get into the Reichswald and stuff, and the intensity of Normandy and stuff. And the next slide is the total brigade casualties as a whole. And you can note, can you see the really big peak? It's in green, and this is from Team Spirit, so I need to get this redone. But you can see the massive shoot up in the Ardennes of casualties. That's 158 Brigade. And that's casualties, so that's killed, wounded, and missing. And when you look at the number of casualties for 160 Brigade and 71 Brigade, it's very much a fraction of that. But yes, for 158 Brigade, this is as bad as the period, in the battle for like Hertogenbosch or the Reichswald, this sort of stuff. So this is a very, very, very different campaign. Whereas the other battalions are sort of running at their usual sort of, well below average, sort of almost expected wastage, if you know what I mean.
I just question from David O'Keefe there for you about the ink, that green spike there for 158 Brigade. Is it because they had more combat, or there was some other reason to explain that high peak there?
Well, they see the most of the offensive casualties, which we'll come to.
Okay.
That's why they get thrown in, and they luck out with 1st East Lancs luck out and 7 Royal Welsh Fusiliers luck out. And actually on the next one, so in the next slide along, breaks that down a bit further, and you'll see which battalion goes off. Now it says 1 RWF. That's actually a stylized 7. I'd say it does look very, very, very much like a 1. But their casualties do totally go off the chart on that. With 124 battle casualties, and that is sustained in what, a 2-3 day period. Actually, for one battalion, it is 1 day of action for 7 RWF. So yeah, we're seeing. Sorry, that's 1st East Lancs all the way off the top, and then 7 RWF is below them. But you can see the pits and the troughs quite clearly. So I do have later on, I do have the other brigades breakdowns to try and contextualize it. But this is a campaign where 158 Brigade bleed very hard. So then, of one division, we're talking about 1 brigade has a really messy time, and even then it's 2 battalions in particular. So again, the most of those divisional casualties, they're coming from 1 brigade, which is quite a skewed way to look at it. So again, when we're coming to downplaying and stuff, so yeah, so on to the next one, which covers Holland and Belgium. So this is a shot from I love illustrations, just to interject. Illustrations are so important. One of the problems we may have is getting permission for images and stuff, which I'm not going to go into here. It's not my day, but I love waving my flag on it because it's a really important point. But illustrations, what people saw, a lot of these were done by professional cartoonists and stuff who were called up and conscripted. At the end of the war, they would do these for the divisional publications or commissioned afterwards. They give a really good idea of what some of the daily scenes, which weren't photographed, because there's not cameras kicking about everywhere like some places. And it also does give an idea of how sustaining the Ardennes looked as well, in terms of just trying to get stuff moving and so on. But the Welsh Division had been fighting along the Dutch-Belgian border, and it had been pretty static. I believe the next slide, I believe, is Roermond. And they're basically scrapping over this area after doing an assault crossing a while before that, 2-3 weeks before. The campaign is static. They're dealing with German soldiers is quite different. So there's quite a lot of sort of small truces and stuff. On one occasion, they have a load of Welsh soldiers get wounded in a minefield. So they go over to their German counterparts, and the Germans go, yeah, sure. We're just going to have a ceasefire. You can send your medical officer through. You can have stretcher bearers. Take all the time you need. We're not going to target you. That's absolutely fine. So they go through, recover their wounded, not a peep back. And on another occasion, the Germans come across in a motorboat, wave at them all with red crosses, and recover a load of wounded they've lost. So there is a sort of a far more genial relationship between both sides. earlier on in the scraps around Belgium, there were incidents with local soldiers having relationships with local girls and some families being strung up afterwards. So there were some units that had almost a no prisoners policy at a company or platoon level, which again does make this is documented, some of this stuff. Not necessarily where you will look, though. Not easy to find places, but you will find it. And in Normandy, obviously, there was an acrimonious relationship with the SS. So it's why I go on to this whole transitionary period, because by the time we go into the Reichswald and things, if we were talking about the Reichswald, I would not be talking in such a fluffy way. It is absolutely horrific. And German propaganda has a lot to answer for. And there's lots of child soldiers, and there's knifing of British guards on the way back by children and things. It's a very, very grim, from March especially to May 45 is a very grim time to be a British soldier in Germany, because you're not dealing with proper fighting formations anymore. And the accounts back that up very heavily. So when they go into the Ardennes, though, there's been this sort of change of the period. They're dealing with a different sort of opposition as well. So when the shout comes for them to race to the Ardennes, next slide please, scramble, you can see the amount of there's one sort of peak in there which I think really, really sums it up, which is when you look at December and you see what happens to January, and this is how many miles the Divisional MT and stuff's running. They absolutely race it, and this is as fast as they've gone during the Great Swan. There's a very quick redeployment. And then they're just sustaining this. They end up, I think, their administrative sections all the way back near Brussels in terms of a lot of their HQ, a lot of their supplies and stuff. So they don't move that. So they've got a few problems. But it's clear this is more, papering over the cracks. And they get subordinated to 30th Corps. So the slide afterwards, where you can see this with a boar. Yeah. So this is taken from 30th Corps history, and 30th Corps get called in to go and deal with their opponents. And it was on the 19th, the night of the 18th December, when Ross received word that they were going to have to go and plug something, and that's when 30th Corps gained 53rd Division under command. They wanted, obviously, to be training and preparing for the campaign into Germany itself. That's not going to happen. And the initial plan is for Brian Horrocks' 30th Corps to secure the Meuse crossings between Namur and Liege. Now, actually, this is why I jump on my map a little bit. And the orders they get are, you block the road to Brussels, and it's pretty clear on this. You're blocking, you're stopping them, you're not letting them go through. The Welsh Division has withdrawn from the line of the Maas on about the 15th of December. It's a bit of a staggered withdrawal over time. With a mix of Scottish troops from 15th Scottish and 11th Armoured relieving different units. So all the soldiers have sort of settled down. They've also started making Christmas preparations at this point, which the Welsh Division has a history of a move at Christmas time, even in the UK, where they have to sort of rearrange things all the way back to 41. There's that night, on the night of the 18th to 19th December, they receive words that parachutists are landing near Antwerp. So everyone sort of jumps to, gets ready for something big happening. And the next evening, orders arrive for 160 Brigade, which is under Cyril Coleman, and Fife Recce to move to the Dal South Louvain. And they want to sort of start moving block units in relatively quickly. Coleman was a lieutenant colonel of, I'm going to be kicked for this by myself afterwards, is it 1/5 or 4th? 1/5 Welch or 4th Welch? He then got bumped up to command 160 Brigade after chap was sent off to command 3rd Division. During Normandy.
Yep, no, can't. Yeah,
He's totally scared me. Coleman was a very competent brigadier, very experienced, had dealt with trying situations before. So other than Elrington or Sugden, who they've actually, 53rd Division has 3 good brigade commanders. You've got Elrington, who comes from 59th Staffordshire. Almost enough said on that one. Very stable set of hands. And when Ross is ill, Elrington takes over the division. You've then got so he's taken over from Blomfield. And then you've got Sugden, who was brought in to take over from Jones in 158 Brigade, and then you've got Coleman in 160 Brigade. Coleman has been there the longest of all 3, and he's been in the division for quite a few years, so he knows everyone. He's a very, very steady set of hands. And the initial details are very, very sketchy. They're basically told, when you get to the line of the river, you dig in, you fight the last man in the last round. We don't know anything that's going to happen. So this is sort of the big action part of a movie. And they turn up there and there's, sort of not much happening. 5-3 Recce, who think they're special forces because they identify as such, who are, again, actually a very, very well-trained unit, do all odd jobs. They race the squadron into Namur. They find everything's fine, and the locals are all a bit confused. So they set up guard posts on all the bridges. They lock that down. And the East Riding Yeomanry are also going to be riding in under their command. So it's all sort of a state of anticlimax by the 20th of December because they've got into position. 3rd Division are in line, holding the line of the river, and like, oh well, okay. And that's where Ross gets orders from Horrocks that the Welsh Division are now going to provide a firm base along the line of the Dial to enable future ops by 30th Corps. Sure, standard British doctrine, belt and braces, firm brace, advance from that. Yeah, this is very basic stuff. I mean, yeah, hold that a sec. So, actually, to be honest, I mean, most of this period now comes where they flood assets in. So what they race up to them is they get 2 additional anti-tank regiments. They have a field regiment with 25-pounders, 1 additional light anti-aircraft regiment, and then they have 5 Avgrat on hand with 2 medium, 1 heavy, and 1 heavy anti-aircraft. 1 heavy regiment, not heavy anti-aircraft regiment. So they gain all these assets, which is now bulking the Welsh Division out in terms of firepower to basically that of a mini corps in its own right. Basically 2 Division Corps in terms of firepower. And they can sit there and blast the hell out of anything that comes at any time. They also realise there is this realisation at HQ from intelligence and other sources that the Germans have probably shot their bolt a bit too soon. So the Germans can't reach the line of the river. That quote as well comes from a German prisoner that they take at one point, which he claims the company commander said, if the men's feet are freezing, tell them to kick each other in the stern until they thaw out. So the Germans are suffering as much as the Brits, and this causes much amusement because the Brits are like, well, winter gear's not great, but it's not awful. We're not having to kick and punch each other the whole bloody time. Yeah, we're sure we're cuddling up in slit trenches. So there is this realization across a lot of accounts, the German willingness to bounce the Meuse, that's dead. That's not going to happen. That is not realistic anymore. So you do have some units sort of moving on forward a bit, like 5-3 Recce, who are sort of sending some assets off, jumping about. And on the 23rd of December, weather clears, which allows air power to start hitting. So they start seeing aircraft going over. Now, I mean, this is starting to go, well, this is a bit more in our wider favour. And by Christmas Eve, there's sort of now a real feeling of anticlimax for some of the units because 30th Corps 30th Corps orders 71 Brigade forward then on Christmas Eve. So this is also why I have to rely on notes slightly more, so I get slightly more started. So on Christmas Eve, they've actually made arrangements now around where they're encamped to camp here and where they're going to settle down. And quite a lot of units and battalions do have full Christmas parties with turkey, with all the trimmings. The divisional history will say it was bully beef. It was not. And there are photographs, you can Google them, of them having a pleasant Christmas and Christmas parties and stuff. And this is what the Americans are fighting the offensive, just to come back to that. So what happens now is that 71 Brigade...
But just to jump in there, John, in all fairness, this situation that they found themselves in maybe isn't quite as dramatic as it could have been, but that's because things are falling into place elsewhere within the Bulge, aren't they? Everything is connected, isn't it? Because of the stand in Baston, because of the Saint-Vif, because of as Steve Zaloga talked about, the northern shoulder there, just because they ended up getting there to finding it a quiet sector doesn't mean that it might not have suddenly become a very important sector. It's because there's all these events happening. This is part of the basic overall plan of the Allies shoving in everything they can that's nearby to fight the fires. Now, when you're doing that, you don't necessarily know where the biggest fire is going to be, but you've got to send your forces in. So the fact they are not facing off with as large a force as could be expected is irrelevant to the overall sense of the plan. I think I've made that point, I
Yeah,
think,
no,
reasonably well.
I'm not massive. No, I'm not disagreeing with that. There's a huge sense of anticlimax though in the troops involved.
Yeah, of course. If you're
Yeah,
there, it's
yeah,
anticlimax. Yeah,
yeah, and I mean, 71 Brigade gets shafted because they get sent off to hold the line of the Meuse between Namur and Givet, and they do lose their Christmas dinners and they are eating bully beef. But there is then a real disconnect in terms of memory because the more extreme one is taken when most of the division is sat down having Christmas dinner. And it's one of the most weird parts of the battle because it doesn't quite line up with what we think. And it's why, again, why I always go on about the American involvement, because the Americans are really taking the licks here to enable this. And also, this is the belt and braces defensive line. If this is hit, then things are really looking bad. So what Ross gains 29 armored brigade, plus the Agra and an additional anti-tank regiment to go and take over from some of the American units, whilst 30th Corps pulls this together by delaying the arrival of 6th Airborne Division. So just to get one brigade up to help the Americans, there may have been some political side of this to make it clear there's a willingness, because you're delaying the arrival of a division to get a brigade into action. So I think that there must be something in 30th Corps documents or Second Army to tie that a bit more clearly, because it's a fairly token effort, throwing 3 battalions at the enemy with an armed brigade versus a full division. The move takes them overnight, and 71 Brigade get into position at 4 o'clock on Christmas Day, with first time led light infantry around Dinant, 4 RWF at Givet, and 1st Ox and Bucks in reserve at Rose, 10 miles to the west. So again, even then, your reserves are stretched out quite a large way. 5-3 Recce are doing active patrols the whole way through. They're all over the place. 5-3 Recce are. This is in their element, really. But again, there's also not much happening in many ways yet. Their time comes a bit further down the line. 29 Armoured Brigade, though, do have a lively engagement, and they destroy what they claim to be a Panther and 3 other vehicles and take 93 prisoners. So there are prongs of German troops that are proceeding through American lines to an extent, but and trying to still push this, but there's not as before, and that does suggest to what could have happened, And then just the 71 Brigade are pretty much settling in on Christmas Day. They get word that 6th Airborne are going to arrive, and they'll be probably back on the line of the Dial on Boxing Day. So they're like, oh, well, we've lost Christmas. We can have a nice Boxing Day. I love that shot as well. The one of the sketch of the lone soldier sitting there.
I was going to get to that in a minute. I'm moving to a head. I don't know. I'm just getting excited. I'm enjoying
it.
No,
it's cool. So, because what I want to do is fixate on some part of this. And because Ross goes forward to leave 71 Brigade, the rest of the division is fully devolved under Sugden and becomes known as Sug Force. So again, we see the main emphasis of Ross as a commander is to manage effectively one brigade, taking the role as a brigadier. And his brigadier is now running the best part of a division. So there's all this sort of interesting stuff going on, which thought points for people, on where the emphasis is and so on. And you know what? They wrap the relief on Boxing Day. 71 Brigade pulls back. It does take a while to formally conclude relief 27th. And on the 28th, they move back to Namur in thick fog over icy roads. So yeah, but then on New Year's Eve, they do get orders to relieve the American 84th Division around March. And Sug Force has great Christmas. So if you were going to be in any part of the Welsh Division over Christmas 1944, it would have to be with Sug Force along the line of the Dial, because you're not being sent up against the Germans at all. They then get word that they're going to replace the 2nd US Armoured on the lights are working. That's a rare delight. 2nd US Armoured along the River Lys between Hewitt and Crevon. It takes 2 days to complete the move. So the move is ordered on the 27th, is not fully completed till the 30th. And now the Welsh Division covers a line of 13 miles. So you now have the division starting to enter the line, and these already under-strength companies are covering very, very large areas. Although there's not much happening, they're strung out. So this does provide ample room for infiltration and stuff. But in terms of the accounts, you're not seeing as much as you could be seeing, probably because both sides have sort of settled down a bit. It's snow on the ground. There's plenty of snow on the ground. It's bitterly icy, and cold day and night. And that move is the one where the first East Lancs gets stuck for 15 hours or so. And air activity is sporadically coming in and going according to air conditions. On New Year's Day, 30th Corps now wants to relieve all US troops along the line of the Meuse, so they can shift the American 7th Corps' focus away from sort of the tip of the Bulge to the flanks, because that's where the real offensive action they want to get going. They're like, we will take this over. And this is frankly where the Brits are going to do their real bit as a corps, which is just hold this tip, the deepest point, as much as possible, so the Americans can use these formations to actually exert pressure and exert their will on the enemy. This is also where you've got 33rd Armoured Brigade in support. So you broadly end up with one squadron per regiment supporting a battalion. 160 Brigade with the remainder of 33rd Armoured Brigade is held in reserve at Bayonville, 4 miles north of Marsh, whilst the left flank is 53rd Division's left flank covers Marsh with 71 Brigade and Northamptonshire Yeomanry in support. And 6th Airborne and 53rd Recce work together to just start squeezing out the American Last Division. And all of this is again wrapped by 10 o'clock on the 2nd of January. There's huge. They also notice now they cannot move tanks near infantry because squishy little infantryman is way too vulnerable. And so they're now ordering many tracked vehicles to move cross country, and many tank crews are saying, look, we're going to risk moving cross country rather than going down roads with motor transport because we can't risk any more accidents. And as they try this reshuffle, the roads are effectively gridlocked. So these aren't massive moves. These are things that could have been achieved overnight. In Normandy, they're doing stuff like this pretty much overnight. You know, a 6-hour window. Sure, we'll get a division out. You're looking at 2-3 days to try and process this tempo of operations. And
what you're saying is reminding me a little bit, whether you watched the show William Nance about the US cavalry groups at corps level, in that they were doing a lot of gap filling. There were things happening left and right, but someone needed to fill in that gap to kind of have that base there so you can establish it and then move around it. And it seems to me, again, I'm really pleased you're not overstating the role of the 53rd Welsh. You're not, some people are putting some figures of how many American troops are lost in the Battle of the Bulge. You're not making any attempt to compare the British experience to that American experience. You're just saying that this is one of the chess pieces on the chessboard, and that chess piece that is there is enabling. It's a pawn sitting on the chessboard, if I'm going to keep with the chess analogy, allowing bishops and knights to do things elsewhere on the board that is actually defeating the enemy attack. But that doesn't mean that pawn isn't important in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, my edgy take is I'm downplaying this. So if you're applying salt, normally a British historian's going to push their involvement. Apply salt on me for downplaying this, if this makes sense. So that's really what I'm trying to push here. Also, the Americans have to move all their units out. This is where they run into the problems moving out the American guns. Now, I spoke to several Welsh veterans who claim that when they relieved the American units in this sector, they ran. There was one Welsh veteran who was adamant. They turned up to do the relief and said, "Hi, we're from 4th Battalion Welsh Regiment, and they met a captain who went, 'Boys, we're out,' and the entire US unit legged it there and then." Oh, I'm doubtful that happened because that would be bloody dangerous for the Americans running. When you think about it, like if you're going to run, you're showing your backs to the enemy, and they know there's mortars involved and machine guns. Also, a lot of this you're being shelled fairly intermittently. This shelling does get more intense later on, and it doesn't crop up in the account so much at this period. But I'm mentioning the allegation they ran. I would include it in a book with then brackets the line after going, I'm not convinced this happened, or if it did, it was a very isolated incident, because it doesn't tie in with what else we're seeing in this engagement at all. So, and the chap was adamant about it. I think it was Emrys Davis, I think it was, who was telling me about it. But I'm not convinced. I'm really not convinced. And that's one of the problems when we're using veteran numbers. Oh, that shot as well as I think from Holland or the Reichswald. I do have a note of where that one was from. On the 3rd of January, this is where things start to heat up, because the American 7th Corps goes onto the offensive. And on the 4th of January, 53rd Welsh are going to attack to keep in line with the American advance. So the aim is that 30th Corps will now clear the triangle from Marsh, La Roche to Houghton. They know from intelligence they're facing 116th Panzer to the east and 9th Panzer to the west. And this is felt to be fairly reliable. And they thought that the 116th were down to no more than 6 battalions worth of infantry total. So that's including butchers, bakers, candlestick makers thrown on the line, and each battalion's around 300 strong. So they're not thinking they're going to face serious opposition in many ways. But at this point as well, they've brought up serious fire support. So the Welsh Division can rely on 2 Army Group Royal Artillery. Now that's 6 medium regiments, 1 heavy regiment, plus 127 Field Regiment, and 2 batteries of the 73rd Anti-Tank Regiment in support. Unfortunately for the British Army, we have amazing supporting kit, such as your 17-pounders and stuff, but you often cannot get it into action, and we're going to come to that quite heavily in a second. Your 17-pounders will often advance at no more, in Normandy they're advancing at no more than 2 miles an hour. They're often near the back of columns anyway, and many units don't really fire their guns in action that much because they're more for fixed defences. It's your battalion 6-pounders that are really in the action. And yes, your mobile M10s and stuff can be up there, but they've got to be at the right place at the right time. And in the Ardennes, none of these conditions are suited to employing heavy kit. Second Army is best when it's, well, actually, okay, this is a bit of an edgy take. I'll probably disagree with myself in a few months' time. Second Army is, broadly speaking, best when they can employ all their assets effectively, and they're using very tight, hyper-integrated command and control structures with really innovative signals work. They've got great teams, such as counter-mortar organisations, pulled from specialists across the division altogether. 53rd Welsh's CMO at this point is pretty much unbeatable. I think this is well within the period when they've managed to get it to 45 seconds of a mortar bomb landing, they can have counter battery fire on you accurately. So you've got all these assets, but in order to employ them, that's a bit of a different matter.
I think we're verging into the conversation we had in the earlier shows about the British, particularly, and the Allies generally, having got used to the idea of controlling things the way, fighting the war they want to fight. So when we think about those big aggros, south of Caen in the kind of late July, August periods, we're used to fighting these battles on our terms and having the Germans react to our advances. And this, initially in the Ardennes, has been the opposite. The Germans have been the one dictating things to which we're reacting. And as you're saying there about the difficulty bringing up 17-pounders, is kind of showing the weakness of our ability to fight as a reactive force by this point of the war, because we just got so used to dominating the proceedings.
Yeah, and also a lot of the time we'd be able to rely on Osters. You've got your eyes in the sky, so you can communicate relatively nicely back. And we've got, if you look at probably one of the most powerful assets is your supporting foos are brilliant because they can just talk to your commanders on the ground. And they often, if your battalion comms fail, and actually this does happen, if your battalion comms fail, you just go to your foo. They've got better wireless sets. They've got 22 sets. There's no sodding about with 18 sets. And they can use all these fantastic assets to sidestep any technical problems you have. So on the 4th, though, this is when it starts. I'm going to try and get to the more interesting point. I'll probably look at 7 RWF slightly more than First East Lanc. On the 4th of January, it's bitterly cold. And at 0800, they decide to start pushing the attack with 1/5 Welsh and 1st East Lancs. They're wading through 6 inches of snow. Now, if you think that, especially for the Brits watching, I mean, when we get like an inch of snow, the country stops, or less. This is pretty hard going. It's physically demanding work. And the physical exertion to make any advance in this terrain is absolutely horrible. And what they find is that they're mostly advancing through continual woodland. So it's a bit like being in a nightmare. There's few defining features. They're told tracks are there. They can't often locate them because the tracks are, beneath inches of snow. When you get beneath a tree or some shrub or something, there'll be inches of snow on top, but underneath it's sodding wet. And if you have to dive to the floor, you're going to soak yourself in the snow anyway. And get more and more exhausted. So it's a this is an exceptionally draining place to scrap in. Many of the Welsh soldiers engaged in this engagement as well. I say Welsh, obviously I'm talking much broader than that. But they do not have proper dedicated winter gear, and they've all been stuck in the open, living like tramps for 3 or 4 days beforehand. The British Army prided itself on getting a hot meal to soldiers every night, pretty much, and they went to ridiculous efforts to achieve it. The Army Catering Corps and runners and stuff really did lose their lives doing astonishing work because it was so important to morale. The food is arriving cold, soldiers are cooking their own stuff up, and it is all hitting morale, and they're feeling weaker for it because they can't eat such good, high quality, super calorific food. By 10:15, 1/5 Welsh have secured their initial woodland, but the snow and mud stops supporting arms coming forward. So they only really have their 3-inch mortars and the Manchester's Vickers to provide fire support. and these are all being manhandled. So you're disassembling the 3-inch mortar, you're lugging it forward, you're carrying those bandoliers of 3 to 6 mortar rounds a time on top of yourself, and all this sort of kit is now being carried forward. We've got mechanized carriers for all this dedicated specialist kit, fantastic, amazing, and it's all now reduced to the speed of the plodding infantryman, which is what, half a mile an hour. So it's now very, very hard to maintain tempo. Mines are all over the place, and every single account mentions mines. And the 1/5 Welch's CO, and which is Lieutenant Colonel Nelson Smith, and their IO, Captain Owen, who's a veteran of the Normandy campaign, are both wounded by mines. And these are indiscriminate weapons. Obviously, I know I'm preaching to converted on this, but there's no way they can also sweep and maintain the advance. This is a point in Normandy. And still modern militaries, if you're careful, you're too slow. You'll lose more men because they'll know where you are. They're going to hear you're going to pre-register you. If you go really fast, you probably get there, but you're going to have some problems along the way and more casualties. What do you choose? And obviously, you really have to choose speed. Frankly, you can't be slow. If you're slow, you won't achieve it. So that most of their engagements are really characterized on the 4th by mines, booby traps, which is always a generic term. It could just be, the Germans get quite prolific with IEDs. They're using naval mines in 1945, which destroys, I think, 2 kangaroos are vaporized by naval mines on a bridge, and all this sort of stuff. And additional munitions they can't use effectively. They're just digging in and blowing up whenever the hell they want. Heavy shell fire is now being used to oppose the advance, and along with smattering of infantry and armor. A few determined rear guards who are halfway good with a rifle will hold you up, especially when they're seeing you come a mile off and you're not wearing your proper gear. Firstly, slank.
To bring it back, because you said at the beginning what a fan you are of a battle dress, and I'm kind of with you on that, because battle dress, the wool and the serge of the greatcoats, it's kind of water repellent, but once that water does get in, it stays wet. And that's anyone who's ever worn battle dress, be it in the real army or playing as I have, you've been to that event where it's got soaked and you bring it back home to dry out. And even inside a house, a battle dress takes ages to dry out, doesn't it? Whereas a Denison smock of cotton, you put it, over the window, over a radiator, it's dry a day later. Battle dress sits there just being wet for days on end because it's the way wool behaves. And I can just imagine going across 6 inches of snow, 5 days you've been living in these conditions, everything is wet, then movement becomes difficult. As you say there, you haven't got this support of the they've been used to in the earlier campaigns of having all this carriers with mortars behind you. Everything's being brought up by infantry. So we're not overplaying the significance of the battle, but we are making time to talk about the physical ordeal it was for those who were there.
Yeah, it's a battle of human endurance, really. And also, even if they're using their rain capes, when a rain cape gets sodden, I bet you've experienced this. They take ages to dry off as well.
Yeah,
so you're in these really messy conditions, and you're having to throw yourself to the ground repeatedly, push yourself up through snow. It's sapping your energy. Plus, you're carrying all this kit, and when you expend your ammunition, you're going to have to get some more. You also, around this period, is when they really don't have control over their supply lines. They sort of half do. When you look at lines on maps, they're not always the most helpful things. So they're having to send armed guards back to escort any supplies coming forward. So we're looking at this sort of, again, they're in the forest. This is an odd place. It's an eerie place. There's burnt out vehicles. There's remains of, there's shattered trees and stuff all around you, and everything's covered with snow. So it's even more exhausting like that. That said, though, there is opportunity. So there's quite a lot of accounts of stalking with Piats being quite effective. So small groups of soldiers who are well skilled can sneak about. We've also got all the Welsh units have battalion snipers who are usually under a sniper section. And these are your eyes and ears for battalion commanders. Quite a few of them were recruited from blokes who used to go poaching. And so if you were a poacher, they'd do you a test where they'd send you to go poaching on someone's land. If you got caught, you failed. If you passed it, you came back with a brace of, ducks or whatever, or pheasants. So, but they do lose some of those due to casualties, and this impacts them even more. I'm not sure also because of the lack of air power, what the photo recce was providing, because units would complain when they lacked photo recce because it's so important to planning, and it really does help them enable it. But yeah, some platoons do quite well. One of the first East Lancs platoons destroys 4 small enemy posts and an enemy self-propelled gun with a Piat. Just also because there's so much snow coming down, you can probably weasel around. So it's a lot more a messier scrap than what's gone before as well. Probably the biggest problem they run into on the 4th though is the battle for Rendu-la-Bass. Rendu-la-Bass was chosen. They wanted it to become a supply hub for things moving forward. With second Mons going towards that. Where is it? Yeah, there you go. You can see it on sort of the right of the image. They wanted to use it to sustain operations moving forward. Unfortunately, when they get there, they find this tiny stream that runs down there, which is the Orth, was massively swollen by water and running pretty damn fast. And to the right of it, there's near vertical cliffs, which they end up calling Mount Snowdon. So the Germans, though, have mined the hell out of all the approach. There's also only one way into it. And to try and get supporting arty, it has to crest another hill further back. So a lot of our shells are hitting that ridgeline, and that's endangering our other soldiers. So we can't use artillery here. So the Germans digging a tank, there's allegations it's a Tiger, which actually I should be able to fact check what that was. But the Germans have actually created a very, very good strong point and an efficient killing ground backed by AMGs, and they're not budging from it. And because they hold this point for several days, basically, because we can't bring our supporting assets to bear with artillery, it's either on this day or later on that a tanky earns an MM being knocked out down here from the East Riding Yeomanry. I think it's East Riding Yeomanry. Probably got that wrong now. I've said it out loud. Because his vehicle his tank gets taken out down by there, and he's in the turret and he slides into the hull and reverses out. And quite a lot of the accounts from battalion commanders and stuff use the word suicidal to advance from here. It's seen as impossible. They can't also make the way around due to the woodland. We often think it's often assumed you can find ways around places, but things like bracken, though, I mean, this grows to immensely thick sizes in forest undergrowth, and it's like going through barbed wire, but just natural barbed wire, which your wirecasters are going to struggle with after a while, and that's caused previous problems. So the Germans have blocked the road at Rendu-la-Bass, and they're holding up the attack here totally by second Mons. They're just basically holding them at arm's length. They can't get the supporting assets. All these advantages we'd normally use just can't be employed here, and we can't get the armor into position. There's a lot of problems as well getting just tanks up playing generally. A lot of these attacks were meant to have supporting tanks, but we can't get them in, or they're having to take cross-country routes, which is very, very, very slow. This whole thing about tank design and turrets moving in woodlands is almost moot. Just moving the bloody 30-ton monsters through woodland is a real challenge, whereas Churchill can just, generally speaking, knock things down. So by sort of 5:30, most of the attacks end before nightfall or about nightfall, probably because, again, it's too cold to operate and it's so physically exhausting to do. That the First Ox and Bucks do take 20 prisoners, and they do also endure some localized counterattacks where they lose major vicars killed. But the Germans are determined to hold this line. They don't want to lose it. They're also bringing in enough quantities of arty to hit it. So the Germans are clearly wanting to hold these positions. They do not want to lose them. Rendu-la-Bass is raised at divisional headquarters, and they're like, well, we've got to take it overnight. We need it for supply to facilitate ops going forward. Otherwise, as you can see here, the limited number sort of like of major roads is quite a problem. We're not going to be able to do it. And 7 Royal Welsh Fusiliers also push through towards Ware. All this area to the right is 158 Brigade country, and this is where they're going to have all the casualties and all the problems. But basically, all those divisional cas are coming from quite a small area. What, 2-3 miles? They're going to come in. When they arrive there, there's not been the forward battalions haven't enabled to do further reconnaissance work because of the nature of the advance, how slow it is, and small scattered rear guards. So 7 RWF are just going to have to sort of go through it. They're also struggling now because the entire advance is grinding up. There's so few metalled roads, the Germans can just hit them with pre-registered arty. Those roads are already, covered in ice, and you can't get the supporting gear forward. So it's all now, this is a battle fought by Sten guns, 3-inch mortars, and Bren guns, and Piats, and 2-inch mortars. I mean, you've got the might of 21st Army Group behind you, and you can't use any of it. And this is where I'm talking up the British infantrymen quite big time, and also the German defenders. I mean, they're holding these positions. This is what they want to do.
Well, that's a very good point to make, because the recurring theme with Peter Caddick-Adams is that the Germans have thrown everything into this. I mean, and as people have said, John Bernstein said, you know, we're hitting the train convoys, bringing up. They've got nothing. They have nothing in reserve behind this. And by this point, early January, they've already lost a lot of armor. They've lost a lot of people. You know, the attack is not going to go anywhere. But the point you're making is 21st Army Group is this massive organization behind, but you can't bring it into place. So in fact, in this environment, within that 6 miles that we're looking at of that map there, the two forces opposing each other are realistically about the same size, I would argue.
Yeah, and the Germans have every advantage because they're fighting defensively.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And it's oddly enough, quite a lot of the engagements I'm most interested in are where 21st Army Group cannot bring all their toys to bear. And it's really interesting. It's something modern militaries should seriously look at, because where you have to innovate or go down alternate paths, you can have all the stuff on paper. If you can't use it, it doesn't matter. If you tell a Welsh soldier right now, that if you go back in time and say, "Oh, don't worry, you've got 2 Agra behind you, mate. It's all right." They go, "Well, they can't hit the target, so great. You know, it's not achieving anything." That night, the Americans capture Biff that night. I'm probably saying all the words horribly wrong because I specialize in like Normandy places. But and 6th Airborne take resistance south of Rochefort. But probably one of the worst events of the campaign in terms of like a personalities perspective happens that night, because at 7 o'clock, Brigadier Brian Sugden, who's in command of 158 Brigade, and his GSO-3 Captain Smith, they're killed when their scout car overturns. Now, Sugden took over from Jones after Jones' command during Operation Green Line, which I write about extensively and can talk about quite a lot. Sugden was a very, very steady set of hands, a Royal Welshman through and through, all this sort of stuff, highly respected. He's just killed when his vehicle overturns. So they lose him completely. So that forces Lieutenant Colonel Hudson, who was a very experienced Normandy officer from the 83rd Field Regiment, to take temporary command until Lieutenant Colonel Exon from 6 RWF arrives, which, if you're keen on Welsh Division, lots of these names will not be those who landed in Normandy as well. So most of the crop who arrived in Normandy have been replaced or promoted or killed or wounded, especially in Royal Welsh Fusilier battalions, where all of them have fallen as casualties. They've fallen in July. And that forces Major Dauncey to take command of 6 Royal Welsh Fusiliers. 6 RWF actually doesn't see much action in this. They take quite a few prisoners from scattered rear guards and stuff like that. And it's possible German platoons who are told to go off and achieve objectives do achieve them, do dig in, and then after 4 or 5 days are like, well, I'm out of food, I'm stuck here, it's clear the battle's moved on, I'm just going to surrender. That sort of vibe does seem to emerge later on. But unless we look at prisoner accounts, we won't be able to confirm that. But we can look at that another time. On the 5th of January, they want to take on La-Bass, Rendu-la-Bass again. 2 months try to clear it overnight, but progress is slow. They throw typhoons at it. Tiffy's going. It doesn't really achieve much, frankly. 158 Brigade, though, does start making some slow progress, although 7 RWF encounters assault guns, which hold them back. They reconsider the plan at divisional headquarters. Not all plans are reconsidered in the Welsh Division always. Different people have said different things about this at times. It becomes more pertinent, I think, into 45. Why or why not plans are reconsidered? There must be a reason. It's probably to do with relationships and assets we know we can employ effectively. Whilst they're reviewing this, though, they hear that there's 7 Royal Welsh Fusiliers are taking 7 RWF enduring counterattack. They had wanted to resume the push on the 6th. They had wanted to look at things again on the 6th. And again, I mean, these are days rolling by to take fairly small positions, in the scheme of things. The counterattack in 7 RWF was pretty nasty. They'd managed to make relatively good gains. But they then get absolutely hit around Grimbermont. And the attack mostly initially hits D Company. Now, the claims are of 400 infantry supported by tanks. Tanks, armor, yes. 400 infantry, I would have to look at that because the German record should be able to tie that number down a bit. Company Sergeant Major Stiff moves around encouraging D Company's troops. Initially, he walks around position to position to position, with his rifle, literally picking off Germans when he sees them, telling them, and keep your heads up, keep laying down fire and stuff. And he stands in a shallow slit trench, shouting encouragement whilst picking off the Germans with his number 4. He earns the MM doing so. Major Tomlinson, though, has access to his radio set, and as they're trying to hold, though, the German pressure builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And this forces him to call a defensive artillery concentration on their original positions because they've been pushed back and back and back and back and back. This does break the attack, but C Company have also been beaten up and are out of ammunition, and they are forced, it says withdraw, they're forced to retreat, they're out of ammunition. And the right company, B companies, all effectively rendered near combat ineffective due to this. By the time the bombardment breaks on D Company and they pull out, they have only 18 men, well, it says survivors, I'll take that as unwounded. So you're looking at a company that is reduced to 18 men, which is, obliterated. And this, if it had started at 150 men, of course, the casualties would be much higher. So we can sort of probably work out companies entering this about 60, 70 men, maybe. Wow. Which I should be able to confirm later on. This also, and B Company's near effective because Major Barber's been wounded, along with his company sergeant major, that sees command fall to Sergeant Ansley, who earns the DCM in the process, who was a veteran platoon commander from Normandy. No, hold on. This is why I throw it back slightly and go, we have a sergeant now commanding a battalion. Oh, wait, the British Army don't do NCO leadership, do they? Well, of course they do. But we have this perception they don't. And a sergeant running a company under really trying circumstances is quite impressive. In total, though, the casualties for the battalion, so I'm told, you've just heard me say, like, there's 18 men left from D Company, they're overrun, all this sort of stuff. 7 RWF only lose 7 other ranks killed, plus 17 missing. It'll be more killed, but with 3 officers and 91 other ranks wounded, including those with exhaustion, because men are collapsing because they are exhausted and requiring treatment. They are continuing to the point of exhaustion. This was a cut-off engagement. All food and ammunition had to be escorted forward to them. 7 RWF was hit so hard they could not function the next day. But if we number crunch that, that's 110 casualties in a battalion's combat ineffective. Like it shows the state of these units going in and where the British Army is going into 45. Ross is quite alarmed by the situation, sends 4 Welsh Regiment Saucepans in to hold the area, along with 1 squadron from the East Riding Yeomanry who do move up. 5-3 Recce move up to Bourdon, and this is also when the Weasels arrive. So from here on out, they do have Weasels that can do forward resupply, evacuate casualties, all this sort of stuff. And the Weasel trial in the Ardennes is really popular. They'd heard Weasels were good beforehand. Ross was keen to get them, but it did take a while to get them forward from 30th Corps. Some of the stuff that 30th Corps was also doing at the time, they had to move 2 Churchill bridge layers. That took 100 hours to do, just to move 2 Churchill bridge layers. So just moving what would have been conventional kit normally with just a few tank transporters, these are big these are asks you have to make to move small amounts of kit. On the 6th of January, not much happens really. They wanted to attack, but they don't. They readjust the line. 5-3 Recce relieved 2 months. 5-3 Recce had a bit of a weird time. They spent Christmas Day on Waterloo. They visited Waterloo and did a backfield tour. So again, it's a very different.
Bizarre.
This was a project I aborted, as I said, to start with. And having gone through lots of my notes on this stuff, it's made me go, I shouldn't have aborted it because there's some really interesting themes. It is odd, it is bizarre. The 7th is the last sort of major day of note. And 4 Royal Welsh Fusiliers and 1 4 Royal Armoured Corps begin their attack and attain the objective by 11:30 against some opposition. First East Lancs attack at midday, but they get hit on their start line by a lot of shelling. And again, okay, it's winding down. It's still heavy shell fire. And that hits the battalion's battalion headquarters command group. Now, First East Lancs do things a bit differently for various reasons. Their commander Burden was an older bloke originally. He's gone by this point, but they've got more and more and more. They tend to innovate. They tend to embrace innovation, is how I put it this way. And each brigade in the Welsh Division was functioning differently. So your snipers may not be set up to do quite the same jobs in each unit. That kills their adjutant, Captain Wildgoose, along with Corporals Stewart and Connolly, and the intelligence sergeant Croning dies of wounds afterwards. some of the intelligence section are wounded, along with a load of their snipers. 2 of their snipers are taken out. And again, that's their eyes and ears now hit early on. It's an early blow. Shellfire also hits the battalion commander's number 18 set, so he can't now talk to his forward platoon, so they have to run it all through runners. It is an absolute messy, very, very much an infantry scrap. They achieve their objective by 240, but each A&D companies are down to 25 men each. In Normandy, some of the worst casualties I found to a company of to 9 men. No, sorry, to a platoon of like to 9 men. So we're not. I'll have to dig to find how each company is organised at this point. They generally did prefer 3 platoons of 3 sections, just small, tiny sections to get that flexibility in. And the only reason they achieved this is when they take the village, they have no comms, but Major McIndoe, they're supporting Fu, had been keeping an eye on things, talking to his other forward observers, and he pulled things together his own and sketched his own fire plan to smother the village with arty, drive off enemy tanks and stuff. There were 3 Panzer IVs defending it, one of which was driven off by a Piat, which hits the turret and disables it. These tanks are hulled down, they're Dulgin, but even they back off, because once that confidence is lost, German armour and British armour tend to back off, because you've made your point, really, frankly, at that point. They are vulnerable. And eventually, once they've taken the village, a tank troop does get forward to help. So, the casualties to break 2 infantry companies are quite small, 18 killed and 71 wounded. Such is the state of an understrength battalion doing ops. This is a battle fought in the near blizzard. They take 30 prisoners, but they can't count the number of enemy dead. They assume, 30 to 60 enemy dead or something, because the snow is falling so fast, in seconds, probably 3-4 minutes, bodies can be covered. So again, we've got blizzard battles going on with British soldiers fighting forward for it. After 1 week in the Ardennes, because of a few other relatively small scraps, 1st East Lancs had lost 11 officers and 232 other ranks. And again, that's another 158 Brigade unit, which is taking an absolute pelting. And these are distorting the stats as a whole as we look at them. When the rest of 71 Brigade goes in, 1st Ox and Bucks, their 3-inch mortar platoon fire over 1,000 rounds in 30 minutes. And this is a battle still, but yeah, like this basically burning out tubes. They take 95 prisoners, but this is because they're struggling to get arty. Again, clearing those hills is a problem. And in Normandy, they have similar problems, but you can't quite do what you want. For the day, they gained 155 prisoners, and they estimated 70 dead or so. And Ross, on the night of the 7th, sent personal messages of congratulations to 7 RWF, 1st East Lancs, 1st Ox and Bucks, and 1st Light Infantry to recognise their achievements. But we can see pretty clearly 1st East Lancs and 7 RWF really have a really unpleasant period in that time. They also start sending out more night patrols. This brings back the first intelligence that the enemy are probably pulling out. And on the 8th of January, 2 Mons take Ware unopposed, and 5-3 Recce find Rendu-la-Bass abandoned with a tiny scattering of troops left in the town, probably men who were too tired or exhausted to pull out and decided to fire a few rounds and get captured. And then at 12 o'clock on the 8th of January, command passes over to 51st Highlands, and having learnt from the earlier misadventures regarding getting formations in and out, 51st Highland just take over the Welsh guns. And they move south of Liege, and their part in the battle is over. But it still takes them 3 days to extricate the entire division from that scrap.
Wow.
So it's taken a while, hasn't it, to get there?
Well, no, it's been good, and people are just laying on praise there, and a great photo. Bring up the Piat there of one of the Tommies there in the snow there. But it brings us back to the casualties, the same data we're looking at, but now we can understand where it comes from. So, in a sense, I'm going to disagree with you and say that you wanted to kind of downplay the role, but what you've been talking about for the last half an hour or so has been really, really amazing information. It's not large. You're not comparing it on a numbers game to the US contribution to the success in the Bulge, but on a purely experience of combat. It's exactly the same, isn't it?
Yeah. And also for the German side, advancing in such conditions and all this sort of stuff. It's the same. It's the same experiences coming through for the fighting soldier at the sharp end, for the logisticians running gear forward, all this sort of stuff. And I'm not downplaying. Well, I am downplaying stuff, and this is because I want to have a conversation. We need to think a bit more about these engagements, what they mean, and take perhaps a broader view of things. at times. Because if we over-egg the British involvement, we do risk downplaying other things, and that takes me back to that exhibition I saw at the start, which it should be way more focus of Americans on that, and that's probably where a lot of this thought came. Oh, it was stimulated by a visit to the IWM. Good God, that actually happened. But yeah, that was sort of the thoughts. And when you look, if you flick to the final slide, I mean, I think that's a pretty good example of what happens. Just the picture of the whole sort of mishmash of infantry in nicked gear, Piets stalking through the snow, vehicles snowed in, infantrymen sort of huddling where they can, and because ultimately 30th Corps do block the door. That is blocking the tip of it. And I just think that art sums it up quite well.
And you made a good point there about it's important to bring in the stories that haven't been told and make sure they're there, but bring them in at a level. We said this at the beginning, applicable level, and not by bringing something in to push something else out. That's the point. It's about looking at all of it. And if there's one common factor we can look back on, I think it's 12 shows I've done in this series of the Ardennes, is that the success there is not one thing, it's all of those things. It is the standing baston, it is crushing the armor, it is the Germans' over-ambitiousness, it is air power, it is the 53rd Welsh as part of the 30 Corps, all of that coming together, and combine that with the German plan that was unsound from the beginning. That is where it unravels. But I'm trying to remember what some of the questions we had. Dermot Rooney asked about whether the experiences there of going through the forests and things like that is going to give them any kind of help when they get into Operation Veritable, which is going to be happening in about 5-6 weeks time after this. Is there anything that these battalions learn from this that they wouldn't have experienced, that was information they could take forward to that next campaign?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. Other than actually weasels, to be honest, are probably the best thing they take forward. Yeah, weasels are really important moving forward. Also the lack of armor, pressing, also endurance. But then again, for the soldiers who were there, they're not talking about that. They're talking about training. They're talking about exercise Spartan and exercise Tiger. For American viewers, there's two exercises Tigers. There's the British one and there's the more infamous American one. But that's what they fixate on, which when it comes to the Reichswall, I think is quite interesting. But I'm certainly for a staff level, they must have learned a huge amount from this. It'd be ridiculous to say they didn't, because they're having to try and manage these formations. And actually, when you do look at the Ardennes, the Reichswall, when they're struggling to support troops, they are resorting to these, man columns of men and stuff carrying stuff forward. But they can rely on weasels more reliably. A lot of the accounts of this suggest as well that they have such limited avenues of advance with supporting kit that they're choked. They have similar problems in the Reichswall.
And generally, I suppose, just getting used to things not going your way. I mean, as we said earlier, since Normandy campaign, I think there have been some, low points along the way, but the Allies have got into the idea of managing their operations by their standards, and the Germans reacting to everything. And as Peter Adams in his roundup show, the sheer number of different terrains the British Army is going to be facing over the next 3 or 4 months is incredible, from the polders of the North Holland to essentially mountain warfare, especially when you talk about the Brits coming in over from Italy and Austria. I mean, that last 3 or 4 months of the war is just about, and urban fighting, river crossings, canal crossings, airborne operations still coming into it, commandos, all those things we've learned, the use of the buffaloes, the use of, as you say, their weasels, all that experience is coming to play. But also, as I just said, to confirm there, the idea of being able to operate when things aren't going quite to your plan, the enemy are influencing things, which we haven't been used to for several months, I guess, by this point.
Yeah. Although they're scrapping along, in Holland when everything is water, is pretty much along those lines to an extent. What I do hope is, I wanted to play by playing it down. Hopefully, sorry, it's weird talking to my camera. Not it's new mic. It's just my computer's had a complete strop to. But what I want to do is use this as a basis for thought, because by saying, hey, we don't really look in this, we don't really talk about it, we can really dig more into this. It's pretty cool. I mean, the Welsh Division's memorial at Hotton isn't it a Firefly turret? Whoa, hold on, why do we have that? Why don't we have a nice big W there and the Firefly turret on a tank, or as a dedicated armor memorial somewhere else? So even that's warped our understanding of how this goes. I've had people assure me the Welsh Division was an armoured memorial because of some of those because of some of the memorials they've seen. Armoured Division.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, yeah.
Really confusing. So, and this is an infantry slog, and it really is a slog, and this is tough. This is physically extremely demanding, and I think from those elements you get a lot from it. I think there's quite a lot of useful case studies we can draw from on how to run units in less than advantageous situations, and NCOs and officers pulling creative solutions together. Tank stalking had been done beforehand. This is a perfect environment for it, though. You know, so there are things like that where a few creative sorts can really get together. And also, if the British infantryman was as poor as they say, oh, hold on, this is a load of tactical level engagements. So what does that? I mean, yes, again, there's all this sort of stuff I can keep throwing all day long about.
I think just the idea about when you're looking at something as huge as the Ardennes offensive was, measuring the relative success, stroke importance, stroke difficulty of these different engagements. There's lots of criteria you can use, in that this was a short and sharp engagement. Some units, you talk about the 28th Division, the American 28th Division, who've gone straight from the Hurtgen Forest to the Ardennes. Theirs is one of weeks and weeks of unrelenting shit. This is a short, sharp burst of shit. And then other units are experiencing an even shorter, sharp burst. But how do you compare these are, you know, rhetorical questions. How do you compare a 4-week slog with a 48-hour slog? Is there value in comparing that? How do you compare what are sometimes for the Americans in the first few stages defensive actions for what you've been talking about, which is an advancing action? How do you compare all those things and balance them out? Which is why you end up with books the size of Peter Caddick Adams, 5 inches thick, discussing the Ardennes, because there's an awful lot to talk about. But when we're on the subject of books, people have asked in the sidebar, when are we going to expect something from you with regards to 53rd Welsh? And if you're going to try and answer that without ranting about some of the organisations that are hindering you.
For legal reasons, yeah.
For legal reasons, folks.
The first point, I wanted to come to the PCA thing, which is a really good point. There's a quote in Philip Coburn's Welsh Spearhead, which I've put on Twitter. Anyone can look at it and download every page of that book. It's fantastic. And there's a quote in there which is, replace fancy with definite fact. Definitive fact, my bad. I'm misquoting it there. But it's again, by digging and really looking it out. Welsh Jocks, Dragons and Saucepans. I want it done very, very soon. All the prose is done. All that has been done for quite some time. I wanted to try and include X and Y and Z. And I'm filling things in. Annoyingly, for those who are keen, lots of the interesting scraps towards Falaise, the images for, are generally hard to get for complex reasons, even excluding the other organisation, who I shall not be named. But yeah, I want it to the publisher. I'm sure be happy to hear this before the end of the month, because I'm actually fed up of it being on my hard drive, and I want people to actually, read it. And I've been looking at a couple of our Wicker projects, which is scary. And I wouldn't mind writing the next one of these one day, because it was meant to be the first.
This brings us back for those who aren't following you on Twitter. This is another discussion for the day. Is the difficulty for the historians at the smaller, without massive, great publishers with deep pockets behind them. The difficulty in using illustrations and images and all this, this crown copyright. Blah 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 thing, that we're not going to go down that rabbit hole there. But it is very difficult for the smaller historian to use images. When we're talking about the British, we're separating the Americans because they have made things so much easier, because the American archive system is, well, a lot better, shall we say?
On that point more generally, so when we look at American division, so with this, actually, this is a point which I do write about in my introduction. That I did say there were 2 Welsh division associations. The Welsh veterans were very poor at serving themselves post-war, in terms how they set things up, how they lobbied. Ross dies, so Ross doesn't appear in World at War. He's dead. He's gone. And there's a lot of tribal identity and stuff kicked in. But what this means now is to try and write a divisional history. If you want to do anything like that, if anyone's really keen to do this, it will take you. I worked out it will cost you 10 or 20 to 30 times more than what it cost me to research, because every archive they allow you to order so much fewer documents. So we're also at a point where fact checking this stuff is way harder as well.
Yeah.
So, and that's not affecting small historians or big historians. That affects everyone.
Everybody.
We can no longer fact check each other's work. I was talking to a couple of very good historians, Callum, who did the Secret Horsepower.
Yeah.
He said, he's got delayed by 3 to 4 years. COVID has massively delayed things, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And the fewer documents we can order, we have to be prioritized. Because I want to hear from people who have things to say. They may be ex-squaddies and all sorts. They may live in different parts of the country, different backgrounds, writing about soldiers from different demographics who wouldn't normally hear from, more diverse history. If you live outside of London, you're shafted. And if you're not cash rich or time rich, you can't write because you can't access the archives in those opening hours.
Yeah.
So the weird stubs of history will remain stubs.
Which is why, if you're writing, and we're not casting aspersions anywhere, because we love all these, anyone who's writing about World War II is good, but the generalists who are just not rehashing, that's a very impolite, but they're putting their opinions about how things were done. Those books are genuinely easier to do than the actual looking at a division or a unit and saying, okay, let's look at the data, let's look at, like, your graphs there about losses. That sort of information is much harder than just, it's easy to do here's where I think the Ardennes offensive went wrong, or here's where Market Garden fucked up kind of book, because it's just opinion, isn't it? And you can sit back, but actually doing something new, which, we go back to your Twitter handle of reassess history, is challenging. And Philip Blood will tell us all about the difficulties of bringing new stuff out there and having to rely on these archives and the information behind it. It's not easy bringing new stuff out there. It's far easier to just, I'm going off on a tangent. There's a YouTube channel I was talking about where the guy has like 20 times more viewers than me, and he reacts to other people's history. So he doesn't make the history, and that's weird how that works, is that he's sitting with himself in the corner of a screen talking about someone else's history product, and he's getting 10 times more views than the person who created the history in the first place. And that seems a bit weird. So there's a lot of weird ways about how creating content, be it for books or YouTube or podcasts, is a big challenge.
Yeah, that's why, if you enjoy the stats I put up, search reassess history. Actually, I've got a Ko-fi. I link everything on Ko-fi. I digitize because it's about the more there's a couple of book dealers I go to who may or may not be watching this, who give me stuff at really nice rates, and I buy it and I throw it online from them. And you know who you are if you're watching this. Things like this is going to go online. Annoyingly, I don't have the other half. If you own the other half of this, please drop me a line. I'll be really interested to hear from you. Team Spirit is on Twitter under, if you type @reassess history followed by Team Spirit, you'll find it. All those graphs are on Twitter. All those illustrations, you can use all that stuff. It was written by the British Army otherwise. I'm not sure if the 30th Corps one, which I've put illustrations up from, I'm pretty sure I've done that one. The Welsh Spearhead is on there. So loads of this stuff I try and make more accessible, because ultimately it takes me time to put that online, which I could be using to do other things. I could be walking the spaniels. There's something that hasn't happened today because I've not felt well enough. But on a serious note, I want more people, and that's my whole thing is like reassess history, get more voices in, more people looking at it. And that's the important thing, because then we can have better conversations about the past rather than the same old rehash stuff. Or the rehash stuff will then look at our stuff and go, oh, that's quite interesting. I could write a generic Normandy history literally in about a week and a half.
And Phil Budd is saying we should have an archive chat, and we should do that. And and I just sent a historian a diary from a 1st Airborne Reconnaissance Squadron guy captured at Arnhem, and he was like, "You don't mind me having this?" Well, why not? Okay, I paid for it originally, but the more people who have it, the better. Surely that's how it all should be, isn't it? The more access we all have to decent information, be it primary sources or dark graphs or data, is the better. But anyway, we're going down a real potential long discussion, but let's bring things to end, and I hope you get better soon, John, and we should bring you back on again to do something else when we have something else to discuss.
I've got loads of stuff. Actually, weirdly enough, I was talking about the Reichswald. We could do that. Le Bon Report, I've got a minute by minute action packed thing, but I sort of would love that to be a documentary because it's really cool. We got loads of stuff.
Well, I'll just come back and say goodbye to you in a second. So, folks, this is just the interlude to what is essentially meant to be my kind of 2-week break period where I'm working on things ready for the future. So, the actual next show is not going to be till January the 20th, and that's going to be about the rise of the Third Reich, and it's going to be about the Wannsee conference. So, look forward to that. Although it's going to be some kind of graphic stuff we talk about there, but some great guests coming your way. As always, remind you to follow what we're doing on Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. Consider becoming a patron, or if not, a YouTube member. I have had a lot of new people join me recently. If you're not following Jonathan on Twitter, you should be. Some incredible information, as he said there, he's sharing with people, and it's not just regurgitation of other people's stuff. It's new primary stuff that you can actually go and take away. And other than that, thank you everybody for watching. So it's just going to be so thank you very much, Mr. Ware, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, sir. And for everybody else, this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying I will see you in whatever it is, 12 days or something. Cheers, everybody. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend. Bye.